Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with part 23, Wisdom, Strength and Beauty from the Freemason's Manual or Illustrations of Masonry by Jeremiah Howe. Chapter 23, Wisdom, Strength and Beauty. A lecture delivered by the editor in the Berkhamsted Lodge, number 742, January 2nd, 1861. The universe is the temple of that deity whom we serve and from whom all goodness emanates. Wisdom, strength and beauty are about his throne as pillars of his work. His wisdom is infinite, his strength omnipotent, and his beauty shines forth throughout the whole of creation in symmetry and order. Lectures. Wisdom. In our symbolic language, the three great pillars which support the lodge are called wisdom, strength, and beauty. They emblematically represent the three grand masters who presided at the building of the house of God at Jerusalem. Solomon, the king of Israel, as a semblance of his wisdom in building and dedicating the temple to God's service. Hiram, king of Tyre, of his strength in supporting Solomon with men and materials. And Hiram, the widow's son, who by his masterly workmanship in adorning the structure rendered it marvelous for beauty. These pillars, which are essential parts of the furniture of a lodge now, are three architectural columns, examples of the Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian orders. The Ionic representing wisdom, the Doric, strength, and the Corinthian, beauty. These pillars have, however, more important significations. Wisdom, by our moral teaching, we require to conduct us in all our undertakings. Strength we need for supporting us under all our difficulties, and beauty of holiness to adorn our mind and manner. As a further illustration, the universe is the temple of that deity whom we serve and from whom all goodness emanates. Wisdom, strength and beauty are about his throne as pillars of his work. His wisdom is infinite, his strength omnipotent, and his beauty shines forth throughout the whole of creation in symmetry and order. Having thus briefly noticed these symbols in combination, let us treat their characteristics separately. Wisdom is represented by the Ionic column and the worshipful master, because the Ionic wisely combines strength without the massiveness of the Doric, with the grace without the exuberance of ornament in the Corinthian, and because it is the duty of the worshipful master to superintend, instruct, and enlighten the craft by his superior wisdom. Wisdom is personified in King Solomon as the column of wisdom that supported the temple. And David's choice in naming his successor on the throne of Israel emanated from divine dictation. Soon after his accession he went to Gibeon, and 1,000 burnt offerings did he offer upon that altar. In Gibeon the Lord appeared to him in a dream by night, saying, "Ask what I shall give thee." He replied, "Give thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad, for who is able to judge this thy so great a people?" And God said unto him, "Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked riches for thyself, nor asked the life of thy enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy word. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart. So there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee." And in process of time, we are told in the sacred volume, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country, and all the wisdom of Egypt. From this it appears that among the Hebrews, as well as among the Greeks, the Egyptians were justly famous for their wisdom, that is, their knowledge in science and art. Egypt was deemed the fountain of the arts and sciences, and the Gentile philosophers were wont to go thither to fertilize their minds by the dew of Egyptian wisdom. This did Pythagoras, Anaxagoras, Herodotus, Plato, and others. Solomon enjoyed a profound peace throughout his dominions. Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and his neighbors either paid him tribute or were his allies. He ruled over all the countries from the Euphrates to the Nile. He exceeded the Orientals and the Egyptians in wisdom and prudence, and his reputation as the wisest of mankind spread through all nations. He extended the commerce of his country and imported largely of foreign produce. He fitted out a fleet at Ezion-Geber and at Elath on the Red Sea, and in conjunction with Hiram of Tyre, who furnished him with mariners traded to Ophir for ivory, ebony, precious woods, peacocks, etc. All this peace and prosperity was the result of Solomon's judicious government. That he was the wisest man of all times must be allowed. We have the warrant for this in God's promise made to him in his dream at Gibeon, and we must remember that his wisdom was a supernatural gift from Jehovah, whereas all other men have been obliged to acquire knowledge by the slow and difficult processes of study and experience. While Solomon was at the height of his prosperity, he received a visit from the Queen of Sheba, or Saba, in Ethiopia, who had heard of his wisdom and came to prove it with hard questions, to which Solomon gave such answers that she confessed that half of his wisdom had not been told her. But alas, prosperity was at length too much for even Solomon. Among his magnificent establishments he had a large harem, composed, in direct opposition to the divine command, of women from the idolatrous nations of Canaan, who seduced him into idolatry. Hence pleasure became the great object of his pursuit. But as the cup of which he drank was not prepared for him by the divine hand, the result was disappointment, pain, and misery. God threatened to divide his kingdom after his death, and during his lifetime there were signs of the coming calamity in the rebellions of Hadad, Rezon, and Jeroboam. This threat of the Most High had the effect of recovering him from his idolatry, and he has recorded his confession of the vanity of worldly wisdom, riches, and honors. Besides the records in the sacred historical books, we have the testimony in the same holy volume of the wisdom of this great monarch, as displayed in the books that bear his name, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Although the book of Proverbs has always been ascribed to Solomon, some doubts have been expressed as to his being the author of the whole. The first 9 chapters seem to form a kind of introduction, and it has been suggested were proverbs in use before the time of Solomon, and from the 10th chapter to the 24th are the monarch's own production. The rest are supposed to have been collected after his time and form an appendix to the whole. We do not assent to this explanation, but suggest that the book is a collection of the Proverbs of Solomon compiled by several hands. We cannot conclude from hence it is not the work of Solomon, as we have it stated in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 4, verse 32, he composed 3,000 proverbs. The title, Proverbs of Solomon, rather shows the author than the compiler. In those periods of remote antiquity, which may with the utmost propriety be styled the infancy of societies and nations, the usual, if not the only mode of instruction was by detached aphorisms and proverbs. Those who by genius and reflection, exercised in the school of experience, had accumulated a stock of knowledge, were desirous of rendering it into the most compendious form, and comprised in a few maxims those observations which they apprehended most essential to human happiness. This manner of instruction, which with other nations prevailed only during the first periods of civilization, with the Hebrews continued to be a favorite style to the latest ages of their literature. Of this didactic poetry there are still extant many specimens in the writings of that people, and among them the first rank must be assigned to the Proverbs of Solomon, who has himself explained the principal excellencies of this form of composition, exhibiting at once a complete definition of a proverb or parable, and a very happy specimen of what he describes. Apples of gold in a network of silver is a word seasonably spoken. Thus he insinuates that grave and profound sentiments are to be set off by a smooth and well-turned phraseology, as the appearance of the most beautiful and exquisitely colored fruit is improved by the circumstance of shining, as through a veil, through the reticulations of a silver vessel exquisitely wrought. And further, that it is not only a neat and polished diction which must recommend them, but that truth itself acquires additional beauty when partially discovered through the veil of elegant fiction and imagery. We select 3 other examples which are deserving our attention for their propriety and elegance. Clouds and wind without rain is a man who glories in a fallacious gift. Gold and abundance of rubies and precious ornaments are the lips of knowledge. Hate stirreth up strifes, but love covereth all transgressions. In the ritual of the Royal Arch, we have adopted a selection from the first portion of the Proverbs, as a means of urging the necessity of acquiring knowledge. This first portion, Bishop Louth says, is varied, elegant, sublime, and truly poetical. It is embellished with many beautiful descriptions and personifications. The diction is polished and abounds with all the ornaments of poetry, insomuch that it scarcely yields in elegance and splendor to any of the sacred writings. This portion of the book is chiefly confined to the conduct of early life, before a permanent condition is made choice of, and all the formidable dangers to which this season of life is exposed, and the sins which most easily beset it, are painted with the hand of a master. And while the progress and issues of vice are exhibited under a variety of the most striking delineations and metaphors, in their utmost deformity and horror, all the beauties of language and all the force and eloquence are poured forth to win the ingenuous youth to virtue and piety, and to fix him in the steady pursuit of his duties toward God and toward man. The book of Ecclesiastes has in all ages been ascribed to Solomon. The tradition of the Jews states that he composed this book in his old age after he had repented of his former vicious practices and had become by sad experience convinced of the vanity of everything terrestrial except piety and wisdom. The acknowledgement of the numerous follies and delusions implies that it was composed after the author had apostatized from Jehovah and had subsequently repented of his past misconduct. The frequent assertion of the emptiness of earthly greatness, the declaration that human enjoyments are unsatisfactory, the enumeration of gardens, edifices, and possessions, requiring a long life for their completion, the deep condemnation of former pursuits, the expression of satiety and disgust at past pleasures, and the tone of cool and philosophical reflection which pervades the whole, are strikingly characteristic of an advanced period of life. The general opinion of the design and scope of the Book of Ecclesiastes regards it as an inquiry into the chief good. The inquiry after the chief good, the summum bonum, was much practiced by the old pagan philosophers, but it is ever to be remembered that they only sought to know in what lay the prime happiness of the present life, whereas the sovereign good, as understood by the preacher, is that which is ultimately good. That which in all its bearings and relations is conducive to the best interests of man. This is the object of the preacher's inquiry, and after discussing various erroneous opinions, he finally determines that it consists in true wisdom. The scope of the whole argument, therefore, is the praise and recommendation of wisdom as the supreme good to creatures responsible for their actions. But in this wisdom there is nothing worldly or carnal. It is the wisdom from above, holy, spiritual, and undefiled, and which, in the writings of Solomon, is but another name for religion. Some commentators object to the style as of a very inferior character to that of Proverbs, but we suggest that it contains numerous precepts for conduct applicable to all ages. All will acknowledge the truth of this aphorism: a good name is better than precious ointment. Content, the only happiness on earth, is exhibited in this sentence: better is a handful with quietness than both hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. And how truly Masonic is the counsel: cast thy bread upon the waters, and thou shalt find it after many days. This must be regarded as enforcing the great and distinguished liberality of doing good to those from whom no return can be expected, and on whom the benefaction may seem as much thrown away as if a man were to sow his seed in the sea, but with the promise annexed that it shall not be thrown away, but in the end receive its due recompense. Freemasonry affords a striking instance of the faithfulness of this aphorism in the case of Brother Ruspini, the founder of the Freemasons' School for Female Children. At the period of its formation, Ruspini was possessed of a good income and could have had no idea of his family requiring the aid of charity. The property he had accumulated was wasted by his successor, and when his remains were slumbering in the tomb, 2 of his grandchildren became the recipients of the benefits of the noble institution their ancestor had originated. But the crowning portion of the Book of Ecclesiastes is the 12th chapter, which, after admonishing his reader, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth," gives a highly figurative and poetical representation of old age, in which the various infirmities and imbecilities of that period of life are portrayed in a great variety of images in themselves unconnected, yet mutually tending to identify their prototype. In this allegory, which is contained in the first 7 verses. Solomon, after the manner of the Oriental philosophers, meant to put to trial the acuteness of his readers. It has, on this account, afforded much exercise to the ingenuity of the learned, and it has consequently had many different explanations. As this celebrated passage is introduced by our transatlantic brethren in the ceremonial of the 3rd degree, the Reverend G. Holden's attempt to illustrate the book of Ecclesiastes offers the best elucidation. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun, or the light, or the moon, or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain. This figurative beginning, intended as a general statement of the pains and miseries of age, serves as an introduction to the more specific details which follow. Remarking that as clouds and rain do not appear during the summer in Judea, we may understand this image to be taken from the winter season, denoting the succession of pains and infirmities which so often attend the winter of life. In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves. By the keepers of the house, the arms and hands are intended as being to the body what guards and keepers are to a palace. Or rather, perhaps they are so called as providing for the sustenance of the house or body. How they tremble in old age is well known. The strong men bow themselves may allude to the lower limbs, which bow and totter beneath the aged. And the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out of the windows shall be darkened. The allusion to the grinders is derived from the Eastern custom of females who daily grind the corn required, and thus denotes the teeth, which masticate and grind down the food for the stomach. The eyes, which become dimmed or darkened, are indicated by the windows. And the doors shall be shut in the streets, when the sound of the grinding is low, and he shall rise up at the voice of the bird. And all the daughters of music shall be brought low. In consequence of the loss of teeth, the act of eating is usually performed by aged persons with closed lips. And then also the gums with their smooth surfaces are obliged to perform the office of the teeth, masticating the food with slow and silent labor, which is probably what the preacher meant by the low sound of the grinding. The word rendered bird, tzipon, denotes a sparrow or any small bird, and hence we shall then have the sense that the aged sleep so unsoundly that the twittering of the smallest birds will suffice to rouse them. When the aged Barzillai, as mentioned in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 19, verse 35, was invited by David to accompany him to Jerusalem, he replied, I am this day 80 years old. Can thy servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any more the voice of singing men or singing women? He here describes deafness as one of the infirmities of age. But it may allude also to the decay of the organs employed in the production and enjoyment of music. And when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fears shall be in the way, and the almond tree shall flourish, and the grasshopper shall be a burden, and desire shall fail, because man goeth to his long home, and the mourners go about the streets. The elucidation of this passage is apparent. It alludes to the difficulty which the aged find in ascending high places, as well as to the timidity which the consciousness of their infirm condition leads them to exhibit when they venture to walk out in the public ways, and which, in the narrow streets of the East, is necessarily more marked than with us. The almond tree, having white blossoms, refers to the white hair of aged persons. By the word rendered grasshopper, a species of locust is alluded to. And Parkhurst says in explanation, the dry, shrunk, crumbling, scraggy old man, his backbone sticking out, his knees projecting forward, his arms backward, his head downward, and the apophyses, or bunching parts of the bones in general enlarged, is very aptly described by that insect. And from this exact likeness, without all doubt, arose the fable of Tithonus, that living to an extreme old age, he was turned into a grasshopper. This idea was familiar to the classical ancients, for we find engraved gems in which an emaciated old man is represented by a locust walking erect on its hind legs, and in which all the characteristics enumerated above are brought out with truly singular effect. All that precedes refers to the decay of man. We now reach another class of circumstances descriptive of what attends and denotes death itself. Man going to his long home and the mourners going about the streets require no explanation. Or ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. The silver cord signifies that resplendent white cord, the spinal marrow which passes through the entire length of the backbone and which is very liable to be relaxed and weakened in old age, or a part thereof altogether broken in its functions, producing the various paralytic complaints, the tremors and debilities to which the aged are so frequently subject. By the golden bowl is understood the skull, and the epithet golden we conclude to be a term of excellence, denoting the importance of the skull and its valuable contents. The pitcher denotes the large canals which issue from the heart, and receive the blood therefrom as from a fountain. The fountain is the right ventricle of the heart, and the cistern the left ventricle. The wheel is the aorta, the great vessel from which all the arteries of the body which carry red blood derive their origin. This explanation, we must allow, suggests that Solomon was acquainted with some idea of the circulation of the blood, a discovery of comparatively modern date. Another suggestion has been offered that in their literal import, the series of images is evidently suggested by some hydraulic process for raising water from wells and cisterns, such methods being extensively in use in the East. Holden. The preacher thus sums up his discourse. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. This we must acknowledge to be a truly Masonic charge, and hence, when the subject of divine wisdom is considered, deserves our especial notice. There are two things in general that perfect a good man. The one a clear and distinct knowledge of his duty, the other a conscientious practice of it, both being equally necessary. It has pleased God, who is the governor of the universe and will be the righteous judge of all, to prescribe laws for the regulation of our actions, so that we may know what we ought to do and what to avoid. The volume of the sacred law is the statute book of God's kingdom. Therein is comprised the whole body of the heavenly laws, the perfect rules of a holy life, and the sure promises of a glorious immortality. The Decalogue, or 10 Commandments, is a summary of those laws written by the finger of God. Looking to the brevity of the expressions and the copiousness and variety of the matter contained in them, we must acknowledge the wisdom of their divine author in reducing the whole duty of man to so small a compendium. These commandments were delivered 2,500 years after the creation of the world, according to the Mosaic history. The manner in which God appeared to pronounce his law was terrible, in thunder and lightning, fire and clouds of darkness, intended no doubt to put the people in mind that if he was thus terrible in delivering his law, how much more so will he appear when he shall come to judge the transgressors of it. The tables of the law are two. The first, comprehending 4 enactments, contains our duties to God. The other, comprising 6 enactments, contains our duties to our neighbor. And by divine authority, on these hang all the law and the prophets. These objects are the beginning and end of Freemasonry, and hence it is not necessary in this place to urge the practice of them. Wisdom, the main pillar that supports the lodge, is the master, who represents King Solomon, the wisest man of all time, and it is practically represented in the moral government of those who are sworn to obey him, who by a knowledge of the laws and the rites and ceremonies of the institution is enabled to preserve due order and maintain peace and unity among the brethren under his charge. It is the bounden duty of every brother to follow the bright example of a worthy master, and while he commemorates the wisdom of King Solomon, let him act as a disciple of wisdom. And remembering that the interests of Masonry are in the hands of every individual brother, be careful not to blend it with his weaknesses nor stain it with his vices, but to walk in wisdom towards them that are without. The royal psalmist says, "The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all they that do thereafter," as mentioned in the book of Psalms, chapter 111, verse 10. So also in the 90th Psalm, which is generally ascribed to Moses and is doubtless the most sublime prayer in the sacred volume, the great lawgiver beseeches Jehovah, "So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." To conclude, Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the empire of shadows where thou goest. Strength. Previously to attempting an elucidation of the other supports of a Mason's lodge, a few remarks upon the adopted form, a suggestion for their improvement, may be properly advanced. As upon examination, everyone must allow that there is in our traditional legend and in our uses and explanations as given in the lecture, some incongruity as well as anachronism. Intimately connected as they are with our rites, they deserve to have their form, as described in the book of 1 Kings chapter 7, preserved with integrity. The lodge figuratively represents the Temple of Solomon, the master personifying, as we have said, the mighty monarch, and his principal officers by name, the two remarkable pillars wrought by Hiram, the widow's son. These pillars, to keep the representation consistent, ought to be placed side by side, that is, one at the southwest and the other at the northwest of the lodge. They should be wrought strictly in conformity with the description in the sacred volume. And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass. And he was filled with wisdom and understanding and cunning to work all works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work. For he cast 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high apiece, and a line of 12 cubits did compass either of them about. And he made 2 chapiters of molten brass, to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of the one chapiter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other chapiter was 5 cubits. And nets of checkerwork and wreaths of chainwork for the chapiters which were upon the top of the pillars, 7 for the one chapiter, and 7 for the other chapiter. And he made the pillar, and 2 rows round about upon the one network, to cover the chapiters that were upon the top, with pomegranates. And so did he for the other chapiter. And the chapiters that were upon the top of the pillars were of lily work in the porch, 4 cubits. And the chapiters upon the 2 pillars had pomegranates also above, over against the belly which was by the network. And the pomegranates were 200 in rows round about upon the other chapiter. And he set up the pillars in the porch of the temple, and he set up the right pillar, and called the name thereof Jachin. And he set up the left pillar, and called the name thereof Boaz. And upon the top of the pillars was lily work, so was the work of the pillars finished, as mentioned in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 7, verses 13 through 22. How the Greek and Italian orders of architecture came to be introduced into the masonry of the Old Covenant, it is difficult for us to divine. But if to preserve the teaching of the lectures it is necessary, we should still have the Ionic, the Doric and Corinthian capitals. Let the 3 lights, as is generally the case, yet keep these ornaments for the purpose of illustration. But as representations of the 3 grand masters who presided at the building of the temple, they are decidedly incorrect. Boaz and Jachin, doubtless in ancient masonry, were the 2 columns. Their curious beauty, enriched with network, lilywork and pomegranates, claims their restoration, and our reverential respect for the great master of our art demands their presence in a perfect mason's lodge. There can be no difficulty in their construction, and it will violate no law to adopt the suggestion now made. In a grand lodge especially, the situation of the wardens and the form of their columns are decidedly objectionable and out of keeping with the ritual. The pommels that are mentioned in the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 4, as being on the top of the pillars, were merely rounded knobs or balls for finish, and these, most improperly in some instances, are now represented as the celestial and terrestrial globes, a very palpable anachronism, as at the period alluded to. The theory of the rotundity of the earth was unknown. The word rendered pommels in the English authorized version has been by some critics translated bowls, but as the Hebrew original does not mention these appendages further, we must conclude they were merely completing ornaments. Holy Writ tells us that David, having been a man of blood, was not allowed to build a house to God, but the Most High reserved that honor for David's son and successor Solomon. Hiram, king of Tyre, on the accession of Solomon, sent to him a message of congratulation, and the latter on his reply announced the intention to build a house to God's holy name. and desired Hiram to command cedar trees out of Lebanon to be hewed for that purpose. For there is not among us any that can skill to hew timber like unto the Sidonians. And Hiram gave Solomon cedar and fir trees as he desired. For this service Solomon paid Hiram in wheat and oil. A treaty of alliance and friendship was made by the two sovereigns, by which the king of Israel was to send 30,000 to labor in hewing the materials he required of the king of Tyre. And over these men was Adoniram. There were also 80,000 hewers in the mountains with overseers to superintend their work. These, we presume, must have been the king of Tyre's subjects. For the foundation they brought great, costly and hewed stones, which were prepared by the stone squarers or Gebalites. In the treaty with Hiram no mention is made of stone. The timber was from Lebanon, and wherever the stone was obtained, it was quarried and hewn with the help of the Phoenicians. In Lebanon and throughout Syria, the stone is all of the same character, a kind of freestone and still used for building. Josephus describes the stone with which Solomon's temple was built as white stone. In the ancient structures of Syria, the stones were of an astonishingly large size. The sub-basement of the great temple of Baalbek, which belonged to an earlier structure, has one stone that measures 66 feet in length and 12 feet in breadth and thickness, and wood measured one lying in the quarry ready for removal larger still, which is calculated to weigh above 1,100 tons. Tyre and Sidon were the chief cities of Phoenicia, the people of which country appear to have been in advance of all others in the arts of commerce and shipbuilding, and in the fine arts rivaled the Egyptians. Sidon was termed Great in the time of Joshua. Homer tells us that the Queen of Troy kept her mantles of all hues, accomplished works of fair Sidonians, and describes a silver goblet. Earth owned not its like for elegance of form, skillful Sidonians had around embellished it. Many other passages might be quoted to prove the repute in which they were held by the Greeks. The superiority in manufactures and commerce does not, however, form the only distinction of the Phoenicians, for they were great adepts in all the sciences of their time, particularly astronomy and arithmetical calculation. Herein we must consider lay the strength of King Hiram. It was by the power of art and science he was enabled to aid Solomon in the raising that glorious house of God. The Phoenicians were a branch of the Shemitic family of nations and originated on the borders of the Red Sea. But it is not known at what period they migrated to the Mediterranean. There was constant commercial intercourse between them and the Israelites. And Tyre is repeatedly mentioned by the Hebrew prophets, who speak of its strength, wealth, beauty, and flourishing commerce. The country suffered in many wars, and its cities were despoiled by different conquerors, by Assyrian, Babylonian, Greek, Persian, and Roman. And in the holy wars, Tyre suffered many sieges. Its fortifications were entirely razed when the Christians were expelled from the Holy Land. The Phoenicians extended their trading over all the known world. We have tolerably good evidence that they came to Cornwall for tin 5 centuries before our present era. Looking back through the dim vista of past ages, we can find no parallel nations with our own so fit as the Phoenicians. Their progress amid surrounding barbarism was marvelous, for until the reign of Solomon, the Israelites were incessantly at war, and the Holy Scriptures tell us something of their neighbors' habits. When Abraham came from Mesopotamia to dwell in the land, it was then inhabited by the Canaanites, descendants of Canaan, the son of Ham, whose eldest son Sidon was the first governor of that part of the country bordering the seacoast, where were founded the cities of Tyre and Sidon. The whole of the land of Canaan, save this portion, was subjugated by Joshua. We find this district called First Phoenicia by the Greeks from Phoenix palm tree, which abounded in this country. Here the spies sent by Moses found a people called Anakim, who were distinguished for their strength. The invention of letters, or rather the art of writing, is attributed to Cadmus, king of the Phoenicians, 1550 before Christ. And as the formation and order of the Greek alphabet bear a close resemblance to those of the alphabets which belong to the Shemitic race, or more especially the Phoenicians. For these and the Jews, until the time of Cyrus, used the same characters, we think with good evidence. We acknowledge there exists diversity of opinion upon this subject. It is, however, not denied that Cadmus did visit Greece, and it is said he merely introduced more convenient and suitable materials for writing, and that from the Pelasgi, an early race of their own country, they derived the knowledge of letters. Now, tradition also assigns to the Pelasgi various monuments of architecture, and especially the ancient walls known by the name of Cyclopean. There are two kinds of these ancient walls, the first constructed of rude and irregular rocks of stone laid together without mortar, and the second formed of stones regularly cut and squared. The former are denominated Cyclopean, and the latter Pelasgic. The Pelasgi, it is generally assumed, were the aborigines of Greece. And if the visit of the Phoenicians is allowed, may we not conclude that the first rude structures were the work of the natives and the more perfect, that of the stone-squaring Phoenicians, the Gebalites? While noticing this people, it is worthy of remark that Gebal, although it makes a very mean figure at present, was in ancient times a city and seaport of some note, and there is still remaining a ridge running into the sea, composed of huge square stones, which once formed a mole. There are also the ruins of a noble theatre, the semicircle of which is 100 yards across. The outside wall is nearly 4 yards thick, and built of very large and firm stones, which great strength has preserved it thus long from the ravages of time, and from that general ruin the Turks bring to all places where they come. The Gebalites were, like the Sidonians, far advanced in the arts and sciences in the earliest ages of the world, and their knowledge was, in their commercial intercourse, carried to other countries. As a people, the Phoenicians are dispersed and lost. In investigating the history of Zoroaster and the mysteries of the ancient Magi, we find that some acute commentators consider the Chaldeans, as the Magi were called, a foreign race in Assyria, and that they were a Shemitic people. All the ancient writers say their acquaintance with astronomy exceeded that of all others, and that their skill in all the sciences was very great. In another place we have endeavored to show that Zoroaster, the great reformer of the Magi religion, was the prophet Daniel, and now venture to claim for these Gebalites the foundation of the science of astronomy. In modern times, the followers of the ancient religion of the Magi have been known by the appellation of Gebers, the derivation of which is unknown. The Gebalites were worshippers of Apollo, whom they symbolized by fire. Through all time, from the Magi of Chaldea down to the remnant now in the mountains of Gujarat, and as Parsis in Bombay, the deity is symbolized in fire. Rossetti endeavors to show that Freemasons are the descendants of the Manichaeans and Albigenses, who all held the same tenets. This investigation does not, however, belong to our present subject. Strength, as the second principal support of Masonry, is physically and personally represented by the Doric column and the senior warden, because it is considered the strongest of the orders of architecture, and because it is the duty of the senior warden to aid the master in his duties, and to strengthen and support his authority. Of the Doric, our lectures thus instruct us. It is the most ancient of all the orders, and hence is plain and natural. Its column is 8 times its diameter in height, and originally had no ornaments on its capital or base. The solid composition of this order gives it a preference where strength is the chief quality desired. The gigantic remains of this style in Sicily are the wonder of travelers, some of the columns being of one block of marble 60 feet high. The Parthenon was of this order, and some of its ponderous blocks are in the British Museum. With regard to the senior warden as the representative of strength in his lodge, it is to be observed that by our laws the master and wardens govern the lodge, and in case of the death or absence of the master, the senior warden summons the lodge. It is of the utmost importance the warden should be well skilled in the craft, and it was intended by the United Grand Lodge, when the constitutions were framed in 1813, the better to prepare the master for his office, that a 12-month service as warden was essential to his election, and although the law does not demand it, it is desirable a brother should have served a year as junior warden ere he attains the senior's column, that he may be said to be in strength to be established in all our mysteries. Beauty. Beauty is symbolized by the Corinthian column because that order is the most beautiful and highly finished of all. This is committed to the care of the junior warden because his situation in the lodge enables him better to observe that bright luminary which at its meridian height is the beauty and glory of the day. But as representing the column of beauty which supported the Temple of Solomon, we must first bestow a few remarks on Hiram, the widow's son. Before we proceed further, it is to be remarked that in Freemasonry, the number 3 is the most important and universal in its application of all the mystic numbers, and we find it pervading our whole ritual. There are 3 degrees of ancient craft masonry, and there are 3 supports and 3 principal officers to a lodge, 3 working tools to each degree, 3 greater and 3 lesser lights, with many other instances of the consecration of this number, besides there being 3 ancient grand masters, of whom the last but not the least in importance was Hiram the widow's son. Among the workmen sent by Hiram of Tyre to aid Solomon in raising the house of God was one whom he styles a cunning man endued with understanding, a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father had been a man of Tyre, a worker in brass. This was Hiram, who, it is to be noticed, although resident among the Phoenicians and a subject of the king of Tyre, was an Israelite by parentage, his mother being one of the daughters of Dan. The narratives of the building, as related in the books of Kings and Chronicles, somewhat differ. Hiram in the former is not mentioned until the decoration commences, while in the latter he appears in the outset and sent with the king of Tyre's letter, which describes him skillful to work in gold and in silver, in brass, in iron, and in stone, and in timber, in purple, in blue, and in fine linen, and in crimson. Also to grave any manner of graving, and to find out every device which shall be put to him. By this and what follows, Solomon was indebted to Hiram for all the ornament, and we are disposed to conclude he was the architect of the building. It is clear that the king of Israel had no subject capable of undertaking the construction of the house he purposed to raise, and it was to the skillful men of Tyre he had recourse. From the description we must conclude the structure was of timber. It was sealed with fir tree, which he overlaid with gold and set thereon palm trees. The beams, walls, and doors were overlaid with gold. The capitals of the pillars were carved with figures of pomegranates. In both accounts, mention is made of the ornamental palm trees, which were carved in the wood with which the sanctuary was lined, and these were afterwards overlaid with gold. These palm trees were doubtless pilasters, as that would be the form in which the palm tree would be exhibited to most advantage. We are not now called upon to describe the building of the temple, as that is done in another place, but notice the peculiarities of ornament by which Hiram rendered the structure marvelous for beauty. It has been remarked that wherever a style of architecture originated, the imitated vegetable forms, if any, are those which nature there offered. But where it is borrowed, the fact is attested by the foreign character of the vegetable forms imitated or represented. The palm tree and pomegranate were natives of Palestine, and the use of the latter as an ornament appears in none of the varied styles of architecture, and hence it must have been the distinguishing feature of the Jewish style. And with reference to the palm tree, Sir James Hall, in his essay on the origin of Gothic architecture, ingeniously refers us to interlaced wickerwork as the undoubted type of the Gothic style in all its leading forms, its arched and grained roofs, its clustered pillars, its windows, and their fanciful tracery. Sir James does not mention the palm, but his drawings show how peculiarly adapted to the purpose is that graceful and elegant tree. This strengthens the theory given in another place in support of Wren's statement that the Gothic style originated with the Freemasons on their return from the Holy Wars. We are warranted in believing that on first seeing the palm, some ingenious artisan must have noticed their adaptation for constructing a building where height and lightness were requisite. And it is quite probable that when the Holy City was gained, the first inquiry would be, where was Solomon's temple placed? And next, what kind of building was it? No traces even of the third temple remained, and the sacred volume was referred to. We have heard that many models in wood were wrought and brought into Europe, and some years since we read a statement of such a model being in existence at Dresden. The description in the Old Testament, combined with the growing palms, suggested the idea for the style of ecclesiastical architecture, which is unrivaled for its adaptation to the Christian Church. The decoration of the temple, which undoubtedly was entirely under Hiram's direction, rendered it marvelous for beauty. At the entrance of the sanctuary were the two remarkable, and we may say Masonic, pillars, which were of brass, hollow within, to contain the rolls of the sacred law. They were profusely ornamented with representations of leaves and pomegranates, lilies and network. From this, a door of olive wood, and ornamented with figures of the cherubim, palms and flowers of carved work, led into the sanctuary. This door was covered with gold and turned on hinges of the same metal. A similar door from the sanctuary led to the Holy of Holies, and both doors were covered with a veil of linen richly embroidered. It was distinguished from all other temples of remote antiquity by the sumptuousness of detail. All this was the work of our Grand Master Hiram. The word beauty, it has been observed, was first applied to objects perceptible by the sight, and by an easy transition it has been extended to objects perceptible by the hearing, as when we speak of beautiful music, a beautiful voice, etc. Therefore we may say beauty is that quality in visible objects in consequence of which their forms and colors are agreeable to the human mind. With regard to works of constructive art which belongs to our present purpose, it is an essential feature of beauty that the adaptation of means to the end is observable, and that there is a similar correspondence in the constituent parts. Every part of a building has therefore its peculiar form and beauty dependent on its destination. For this reason, all ornament in architecture should be subordinate to use, and should grow out of and be suggested by it. Whence professed architects, with whom the idea of decoration is predominant, often fail in their attempts to produce beauty, and in many cases seem rather to adapt the building to the ornament than the ornament to the building. Accordingly, it has been observed that civil engineers, whose attention is solely directed to the use of that which they plan, often construct more beautiful buildings than persons with whom beauty is the chief consideration. And generally it may be observed that all ornament, if accumulated to an excessive degree, either from a love of gaudy magnificence or for the sake of ostentation, is devoid of beauty. 'Tis use alone that sanctifies expense, and splendor borrows all its rays from sense. The Corinthian order, to which the column of beauty belongs, is one of the three ancient Greek orders of architecture. Its shaft is taller in its proportion than that of either of the others, and its capital is profusely ornamented. Without entering into a detailed description, the very pretty story which Vitruvius tells us of its origin will sufficiently explain the style of the capital. Callimachus, accidentally passing the tomb of a young lady, perceived a basket of toys which had been left there by her nurse, perhaps as a votive offering of affection, covered with a tile and placed over an acanthus root. As the branches grew, they encompassed the basket, till, arriving at the tile, they met with an obstruction and turned downwards. Callimachus was struck with the object, and he made a drawing of it. The base of the capital he made to represent the basket, the abacus the tile, and the volutes the bended leaves. Vitruvius is the only architect of the ancients whose writings have come down to us. He flourished during the reign of Augustus, about the birth of Christ. As wisdom is practically represented by the master, so strength and beauty, the pillars that complete the triform supports of a mason's lodge, are exhibited by the wardens as representatives of the two Hirams by whose power and talent Solomon was enabled to construct and beautify the house of God, and in strength to establish it. The union of these two qualities in his holy tabernacle is proclaimed by David in the Psalms. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary. And in the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 16, in the Psalm of Thanksgiving, which he composed for Asaph on the ark being placed in the tabernacle, he calls on the people to seek the Lord in his strength. And he tells them that glory and honor are in his presence, strength and gladness in his place. God is our refuge and strength, as mentioned in the book of Psalms, chapter 46. In Psalm 84, which is expressive of confidence, blessed is the man whose strength is in thee. The strength which is referred to with commendation or praise in the sacred volume is godlike majesty and puissance, for mere brute force is set at naught, in Psalm 33. There is no king saved by the multitude of an host. A mighty man is not delivered by much strength, and horse is a vain thing for safety. Neither shall he deliver any by his great strength. Wisdom, strength, and beauty of nature. From the form of vegetables, we have some of the choicest of our ornaments, and have taken some of the most useful hints in architecture. Smeaton, who first succeeded in fixing upon the dangerous rock of the Eddystone a lighthouse that has resisted for 100 years the violence of the sea, and as far as human calculation may venture to surmise, will endure many centuries, moulded its contour from the bole of an oak that had withstood the tempests of ages. To conclude, the Hebrew word nave, which signifies beauty in some places, refers to a dwelling or the tabernacle. Singers were appointed by Jehoshaphat to praise the Lord in the beauty of holiness. And David also says, worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness, which by the marginal explanation is in his holy sanctuary. From these passages, and many more might be selected, the designations our Masonic supports received from our ancient brethren are proofs of the diligent use they made of the sacred volume of God's law. And thus a study of our institution and its teaching must infallibly require a frequent and careful perusal of the Book of Life. There we are instructed that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and happy is the man that findeth it. Let us in strength be clothed in the armor of righteousness, and endeavor to grow more and more into the likeness of God, and to whatever station the providence of God may please to call us, let us adorn it with the beauty of holiness. If thus, to use the language of David, we set God always before us, as mentioned in the book of Psalms, chapter 16, like him we shall not be moved. The apprehension of his omnipresence will be the guard of our conduct and the support of our steps here, and the enjoyment of that presence our exceeding great reward hereafter. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses, links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.